Hello, welcome back to Monetize Forum 2021. I'm Igor Stenmark. I'm one of the co-founders and managing director of MGI Research, and I will lead the next keynote on Configure Price Quote with CPQ. If you come from a sales or sales ops background, or you're in finance and product management, undoubtedly you have either heard about CPQ, or you may be using it, or maybe you have used multiple CPQ products in the past. This is one of the most dynamic and interesting areas of innovation in quote to cash and in monetization more broadly. It is also an area that's often overhyped, and it's also an area that you should be paying very close attention to, because we believe that, for one, it would be difficult for any company to achieve really good success with monetization without a robust functional CPQ capability. So to put a lens to CPQ, let's start with some key issues. We're really going to focus on three major questions here. What is a business case with CPQ? How should users think about it in the context of both monetization and quote to cash? How will capabilities within CPQ can drive strategic differentiation for your business, and how the requirements are changing? And where are the opportunities, for example, for innovation? So what are the best methods for finding the right solution for your company? And how should you think about investment in this area? And lastly, we'll take a look at the evolution of this market, which is very dynamic, as I mentioned earlier. It's changing fairly rapidly, and there are a lot of interesting things happening both technologically and also from a business standpoint. Let's take a quick step back and redefine again monetization, because you're going to hear us refer back to this concept of monetization and also to a model what we call Agile Monetization Platform, or AMP. So we define monetization essentially is a business practice that helps companies sort of convert opportunities into revenue, profits, market share, competitive differentiation. It is not a product. It's not a single business process. It's not something that you can go and buy a box labeled monetization. But one way to think about it is really an expansion of the original quote to cash concept into modern times, kind of a more broader definition of that. But rather than saying it's quote to cash, it's really all the way from prospect all the way through revenue disclosure. And that's a much more comprehensive capability. We often use this model that's in front of you, Agile Monetization Platform. Think of it as a reference architecture for monetization and for quote to cash, which is a subset of monetization. And it's built around a central service bus architecture where each individual function, like CPQ, like billing, like e-commerce, serve a particular purpose. And at the same time, they communicate by sharing data and control signals. A good way to think about it, the best analogy I can think of, is one of a human body, where you have the central nervous system, the bloodstream, and all of the organs in the body, heart, brain, lungs, liver. We serve a particular function, but yet we exchange the information with our organs and work in concert. To give you a kind of a sense for what CPQ is good for and why it's important and why you should be paying attention to it, we decided to bring you an example case study, which was written up as essentially as a narrative, as a calendar diary, written by a very senior salesperson at a very sophisticated, large company that sells complex B2B products. So I'll go through that quickly and invite you to reference it back when the conference comes back in on-demand mode. So in January, I'll impersonate here a sales guy. Customer called and wants to order additional components. Very excited to get an opportunity right after the fiscal year closing. February, promised customer quote 10 days ago. Still looking for all the right parts and pricing. And then there is a subscription to online training. March, customer is still interested, but we are arguing over price and terms. We really do not feel that our quotes reflect the existing contractual relationship. April, deal is finally signed, but I did not make my Q1 quota. May, customer is complaining, but the components delivered did not match their base system. Also, they cannot decipher our invoices. Most importantly, they are refusing to pay our invoice until the parts issue is resolved. June, we had to take a return on some of the components and reship items. Customer is not so happy with me, and neither is anyone here. Invoice is still not paid. I have become a collection agent. The finance guys are making fun of me. My boss is not amused. July, extreme frustration. I have had it. This is not my job. I'm spending too much time fixing a broken system. Help. September, invoices finally paid. But now we are finding out that some items were not invoiced because our billing system cannot support usage-based pricing. December, we are likely to miss targets for the year. If I did not have to chase parts and prices and invoices and collection, I could have had more time to sell. So I think all of you here get the picture. This is a relatively simplistic representation of what was originally actually a much more complex situation. Then we've written out kind of an example of what a successful CPQ process looks like. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through every bucket of information here. This is going to be accessible online. Encourage you to go and check it out when you have time. Suffice to say, but here is not only an example of a successful implementation of CPQ, but it's an example of successful and deep integration of CPQ with other key components of enterprise systems, ones that are hanging off that central bus and AMP reference model, contract lifecycle management, manufacturing, invoices, revenue management, professional services automation. It is also really an example of a case where a company was able to keep a lid on discounting and not really allow this to go wild. And also they were able to grow with business, grow with sale, and do it in the record time relative to the original diary that you saw previously. So this is a good case study to see what is possible. So the art of the possible. So what is CPQ? What is kind of standardized definition? So CPQ is a software discipline that enables companies to automate complex sales tasks. So it's really it's a discipline to control complexity and to simplify and allow the business to do complex transactions at scale. So if you have a sales force now, but maybe you just started the company and you maybe have 15 to 20 salespeople and they're all nines and tens, they're fantastic. Imagine in 3 years, you'll probably have 200 salespeople or maybe 500 salespeople. You'll have channel partners. And to control quality of resources at that scale is much harder. If you start with salespeople with the nines and tens, chances are as you progress, you're going to get what's statistical. Really, you're going to get 5, 6, 7 caliber people for the most part. And how do you take this average pool of talent and get them to sell products with typically above average complexity and achieve above average results? So that's what CPQ in the strategic sense really enables to happen. And this applies both across B2B and B2C. It applies to physical goods, digital goods. It applies to self-service. It applies to guided selling. So there's a lot of context for usage of CPQ. Breaking it down, what are the key components of CPQ? So it's configure, price, and quote. Configure really allows to resolve constraints related to the product. So here's a product, and here's an installed base that the customer has that has to match. And then on top of that, the customer says, I need to have the new product delivered to me by a certain date. So there's a transportation constraint. There may be a manufacturing constraint. There may be a pricing issue that has to be resolved. There may be environmental or regulatory constraints that have to be resolved and addressed. So a product has to fit as much ideally as possible into the footprint that the customer prescribes. When on pricing, this is typically the area that's kind of most overhyped in CPQ. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be paying attention to it. I would. Things are changing. And so this is, on one hand, a discipline, a component of CPQ that helps enable pricing discipline, pricing accuracy, margin enhancement. On the other hand, there are use cases where companies have been able to optimize pricing, whether it's for a commodity product or in many cases for unique products, and kind of come up with proposals that have a higher chance of being accepted. Again, expectations in this area tend to be overinflated, but there are companies that have serious capabilities in this area, and those need to be paid attention to. And then quotation, this is really not about sending somebody a piece of paper or a nicely colored PDF file. This is about creating an interactive experience for the prospect to make sure that they engage with that. Think of it as a mini site, a mini virtual reality experience, if you really can justify the expense of doing that. And lately, it's been a lot about visual presentation of the products to kind of allay customer concerns about, like, I can't travel to your location to check out the product. I can't go see your customers. So I need to make sure that what you're sending me is really going to match, because my career is on the line, and we have a lot of writing on this opportunity. So the capability range for this key elements is pretty wide. So if you look at configuration, if you look at some of the products that are really what we call mass market CPQ solutions, they have very basic capabilities, sometimes starting with if you're buying product B, you must have product A as well installed, but you cannot have product C. That's something that most products handle very well. And then it goes much, much deeper and really becomes verticalized at the high end. The origin, the genesis of this technology goes back to the 60s and 70s and the early 80s, when computer technology manufacturers were the first companies to really implement configurators that help them configure complex products. Pricing, as I said, it's often overhyped, price optimization, and overpromised, but there are certainly opportunities to focus on this area. One area that's been very exciting lately is one that deals with dynamic pricing. The pricing can be varied based on various attributes of what conditions that exist. And we've seen extreme examples, for example, Amazon, when they, in some of the products, they vary the price of an item, several times an hour, if not more often, and also make it geographically relevant as well. So there's a lot of things that can be done here. And then quotation, this is typically the most consistently delivered element of CPQ. Some vendors provide very specialized solutions in this area, and it's a long distance now from a 8.5 and 11 or an A4 piece of paper. So worth paying attention to. The use cases for CPQ, for all elements of CPQ, kind of like who are the entities that benefit and really use it. It ranges from obviously sales and sales operations, product management, finance, revenue cycle management, billing. Even we've seen R&D organizations connect into that to kind of tie in their designs into the new configurations. Another aspect of kind of success here has to do with not just implementing the configure price quote solution, but really integrating it to a broader set of capabilities. CPQ does not equal quote to cash capability. Very, very important. This is just one important element, but just one element. There are other capabilities in your monetization kind of ecosphere, and those could be housed in different systems. So the real kind of success and differentiation can come not only from implementing your base component, but really in expanding integration dramatically into contract lifecycle management, into billing, into financials. So there's a lot of opportunity here to create innovation, and that's very, very important. So to summarize, the business case for CPQ, pretty solid. You can get market share gains. You can sell complex customized products at scale. You can achieve higher sales productivity, bigger transactions in shorter time with less discounting and less rejection of orders, so higher closing ratio. Speed, as we say here, speed is the new black, but still remains the case. And you can get to what we call improved sales precision, where you have a reduction in actual order returns, reduction in disputes, which can sometimes be very significant. We've seen some companies where they regularly, routinely have between 15 to 20% of their revenue, quote unquote, arrested in those disputes. And that could be significant if you're running a multi-billion-dollar business. Laying out kind of with different segments of the CPQ market, we differentiate between different kind of levels of capability in configuration, pricing, and quotation. So a large C, a small c, a medium-sized C, a large P, a small p, a large Q, and so on and so on. And most vendors have strength in one, maybe two areas, or as an example shows here, there's some companies that really are very successful selling mass market CPQ solutions. So CPQ has been around for a long time, but for the longest time, it was considered to be a niche opportunity, and it really didn't see the light of day. And then Salesforce came around and acquired a company, and basically took the CPQ capability into the mainstream to companies that never before considered buying something like that. They weren't in manufacturing, they may have been in publishing, in digital services, advertising, and all of a sudden they realized, gee, we can really take advantage of it. We can guide selling, we can kind of stimulate upsells, cross sells, do new bundling, and so on and so on. So that's a very healthy area of business. Salesforce has kind of recreated, reopened this area, and they dominate in that space. Then there are capability companies that offer solutions that deal with kind of focus on a particular discipline, either configuration or pricing or quotation. And then there are companies that offer solutions for particular industry. Maybe you're buying school buses, or maybe you're buying specialized medical equipment for hospitals, or elevators for large hotels. When you can lay this out into kind of two dimensions, kind of apply intersection of two major axes here. Complexity is one, and agility is another. And depending on what you need, you're going to end up looking at different kinds of products here. Not all CPQ products are created equal. How do you go through the selection process? It's definitely a challenge if you want to do this with some level of precision, but there are a few basic rules of thumb that you can follow. No product or vendor likely to be equally great at all three capabilities, so pick carefully, trying to optimize for all three, kind of reconcile those constraints, kind of applying CPQ to CPQ, will prove impossible. So figure out your use case, prioritize. Domain expertise is very, very important. In some cases, if you are in maybe a media industry, look for a media solution. If you're in manufacturing, in specific kind of manufacturing, specific size, look for that. So we have a mechanism that we've been working on called MGI use case mapping that's proved to be very effective at helping companies kind of crystallize their thinking in this area. And it really kind of says not only what does the vendor offer functionally, but where have they had success, actual installed success over some period of time in terms of size of a company, geography, industry, focus, business model, complexity, and so on and so on. And that's proven to be a very effective mechanism to help companies kind of find their vendor mate, if you will. The other tool that we use in our practice is something called MGI 360 ratings. And some of you in the audience may be very familiar with that. It's a comprehensive structured rating system for technology companies with a rating score from 0 to 100, where all of the rating elements with 5 major components to it and over 150 different criteria would go into that. Kind of look at things like product, how strong is the product, how competent and experienced is the management team, do we have a multiplicity of channels to take a product to market, does a company have a strategy that's compelling and durable, and is a company financially stable, growing, profitable, and has right financial backing and resources to achieve success. The landscape of CPQ suppliers with overall market is extremely fragmented, despite kind of like significant footprint that Salesforce has in this space in terms of a mass market CPQ solution. Most companies are sub $50 million in revenue every year, and many are smaller than even $10 million a year. And as a result, many of them lack critical mass in sales and marketing budgets, and oftentimes they may not have balance sheet strength. And also being so small puts the implementation effort squarely onto them, because very few systems integrators want to really engage with a company that is that small. So there's lots of innovation here, opportunity anyway, for innovation for vendors, not just in R&D, implementation, partnership, packaging. Major ERP vendors are still kind of behind. In terms of large vendors, I mentioned Salesforce. Besides Salesforce, it's Aptus Conga that's very present in this space, Deal Hub, CloudSense, obviously companies like Pros Holdings and SAP and Oracle, and there's quite a few others that are kind of successfully kind of building businesses in this area. But overall, we would rate this space as extremely fragmented. It's continuing to grow at a pretty healthy pace. We've been tracking it actively since 2016. And when I revised the forecasts in 2017, 2018, we expect the market to crack through 2.3 billion this year and crack for 3 billion the following year. But our sense overall is, given the type of a problem it solves and what's out there, this is still really a tiny fraction of what will eventually be spent. So we are in very, very early stages of what is really a pretty exciting opportunity for vendors and investors, but also exciting, I think, for some of the buyers in terms of what can come in the future. Some of the trends that you should be aware of, there are some things that were driven during the pandemic times, like really the fact that CPQ and modern e-commerce is no longer a nice to have. This is an absolute must, regardless of what your business model is. There's been increased demand for visualization because people can't travel. That's a very significant factor. And there's more emphasis on integration. And then amongst the things that are persistent, there's this constant kind of evolution of being able to support different pricing models, integrate a signature, do very advanced interactive quoting with collection of metadata. And then there's the issue of, is CPQ ready for what we call a PQ exit? Meaning, does it really stay as one discipline or does it break up? I'm going to move and try to share with you kind of our view. We think that the baseline CPQ platform will probably remain pretty steady, and that will be represented mostly by the mass market CPQ solutions. But then there are tremendous opportunities for kind of a Lego-like expansion in this market for providing advanced configuration capabilities that are market specific, advanced pricing and pricing optimization, pricing servers, dynamic pricing, and also interactive quotes, really with visualization at a totally different level. Opportunities for differentiation. Question is, if everybody has CPQ, how can I make a difference here? It's going to come primarily through integration, we think, and also focusing on a few key areas like in quote management, making things interactive. This is a pretty good area of opportunity to really set your business apart. How can MGI help? Call us. We are always happy to hear from you, and we're always happy to help if we can, and in many cases we can. Thank you for joining us here today, and we hope you have really nice rest of the conference. Thank you.